everyone. Welcome to today's episode. We are going to discuss, is free will a responsibility? So we have regular events that go on in our lives, but there was a churning yesterday that a lot of people are hurting. And this leads us to the discussion of free will, and is it a responsibility, and if so, how is it a responsibility?
Well, I think kind of what spurred this conversation for us, one of the things that inspired us to have this conversation, to share this conversation, is we were watching an episode of Charlie Kirk's show, and he had gotten the question, how can you believe in God when something like something like what happened in Minneapolis yesterday happens? Like, how can you believe there's a God? And it kind of sparked a discussion in our house multiple times, and so then we were discussing it today. And, like, for instance, Charlie was talking about how we all have free will, and some people believe that there is not, like, everything is predetermined. So for example, if someone wakes up that day, it's predetermined that they're going to do that. But actually, they made that choice. God did not tell them, you need to go do this, because God is not evil. But he was explaining it as, if you believe in God, then you know that that's morally wrong. You know there's an evil side to it. If you do not believe in God, then that should not upset you. You shouldn't think it's evil. You shouldn't think it's wrong. And so I feel like that's a very simplified way to look at it. Is if you don't believe in God, then that should not be an issue. That should not be sad to you. And I totally disagree with that theory, but it's true. You can't have it both ways. You can't say there's no God and this is evil and all of that. But then if you do believe in God, you know that's wrong. You know that was a very evil decision, basically, that person chose.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think God created us with free will, and we talked about this when we were talking about this discussion, is we're not robots. He didn't create us to be his robots, and God gave us the ability to choose. You think about, like, Genesis, and this is something we discussed. You think about Genesis, okay? He told them specifically not to eat of that certain tree. And what did they go and do? Like, if he wouldn't have had to have even told them to don't do this, if they would have already, like, I don't know, been his robots. So Adam and Eve, they had the choice to obey or to disobey. And we see where it leads us to today.
Mm-hmm. And with free will, it is a responsibility. I mean, because if we are not paying attention to our choices, which free will is free choice, and there is a consequence or a benefit for every choice. If we go this path or this path, the highway with the school of wisdom, or the low way with the school of hard knocks, the lies. I like to say, rise up and be wise, or we do the opposite and we live the lies. And, that is something that I did not learn this at a young age. My parents, they did the greatest job they could in raising me, but, like, fully understanding this of how every single choice I make will affect me and everyone else, whether I even know it or not. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And are the choices I am making the best for me, but the best for all? Mm-hmm. Not just for me or for my family or for me and this person or this or that. And some people will say, that's just too much to think about. You're overthinking this. Well, but I want to make the best choice for everyone. I don't want to include greed, lust, pride, entitlement, all of these anger, all of these different behaviors in, and someone call them emotions or whatever. But what happened yesterday in Minneapolis, the person was not born this way. It is learned, it is programmed, it is conditioned, influenced. Even if you say, okay, now even in the utero, they can still have that going on, but that child was not born with these behaviors or beliefs. Mm-hmm. That is due to family, culture, environment, society, and what we need to do is get at the core of it, of all of us humans that do need help, and be able to help each other. That could sound very overwhelming and a lot, but we need to grasp it and be responsible with free will and teach that to each other.
And I think that there have been so many lies and there's been so many lies that have been accepted as truth, especially in recent years, in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, longer than that. I mean, you go back through the entire Old Testament of the Bible, like anything like that. Stuff like this happened. It just was different because technology was different. Like, they didn't have the same things we have. But the idea of these things has happened since the beginning of time because people, again, have free will. But in today's age, we've accepted and enabled and even in a weird way honored or like worshipped these false ideas, these false truths, which they can't be a truth, they're false, these lies that instead of helping the people like they say it's going to, it's hurting people. It's not just hurting one person, it's hurting that person, it's hurting whoever they choose to hurt in turn. And as a domino effect, it hurts everyone, really. Because like we are all created in God's image. God did create us that way. But when we're using our free will to go against God, to say even there isn't a God, then that hurt is just going to trickle down from you to your family, to your friends, to the people they know, and it just keeps going. And so it's like you have to start somewhere in the sense of acknowledging these lies that we've allowed to kind of infect our world, but also our nation, and get to the heart of the matter, like you were saying, Mom, and like not accept that anymore. I mean, you have to be willing to stand up for it. And it's kind of like, when you read in the Bible, there were people that were scared, and we talked about this in one of our mental attire videos that you can find under that tab on our website. But they didn't necessarily know how they were going to do it. They were scared. They couldn't see how they as one person, or even maybe just like a small group of them, could make a change. But that's what it took. It took the faith of that one person, And so I think that's one of the big things that like we've even discussed is like you have to be willing to stand out for good. That's another topic we've talked about, and you have to be willing to not necessarily be popular in the sense of like it's going against the grain, which it shouldn't be, because God did create all of us, and so it should be our natural instinct to follow God, in my opinion. But because of our free will, some of us choose to use that in very negative and hurtful ways.
Well, and I think free will, it comes with consequences. Every single decision we have as an outcome, it's either a blessing or a curse. And you think about Deuteronomy, I think it's 30, verse 19. It says, choose life, so that you and your seed, they will have life and they will live. And, and I think they will prosper. And so God offers, and like Amy says a lot, the highway, or are you going to choose like the hard way? And God offers salvation to whosoever will. And that's in Romans. And so we can either choose this highway or we can choose to reject it.
Mm-hmm. And as you were saying, I lost my thought. I was paying attention and then I totally forgot. Intergenerational, ancestral patterns of our behaviors, our habits. We don't just, fears of spiders, dogs, this and that. These things come about, and that's on a very simplified, but we are talking what we learn. We either learn from our environment, our family, our culture, our society, influences from peers, from social media, from TV, from books, from magazines, it goes on. In person, watching people, we unconsciously pick this stuff up. 95% of it, we are, like hypnotized, and like even for the first 7 years of our lives. And we need to be aware and pay attention more. Even as parents, we need to work on ourselves, and we need to understand the habits and patterns and behaviors we bring to our marriage and bring to our family and to our children. Because whatever we haven't worked through, guess what? The cycle continues. And it's not going to go anywhere. Just like with addictions or vices or anything. If you ignore them, they don't go anywhere. You got to pull the weeds. We talk about, I don't remember what video it was in our mental attire, that if we ignore the weeds, they're not going anywhere. They're snowballing. They're getting bigger. And here in this situation, this did not start with one person. And, as Cleopatra even mentioned, and you both have said of, now I lost my thought again. I don't remember where I was going with that. I'll let somebody else talk.
Well, and think about free will. I feel like I just lost it again too. God doesn't force us. He's not going to force you to do anything. So it takes you to pull up those weeds. It takes you to choose, hey, and that's your free will choosing, to pull up those weeds and to make a difference and to stand out for good. And so, Joshua, I think, says, choose this day whom you're going to serve. And so every day we decide, even between, like we've talked before, vice or virtue or obedience versus disobedience. So choose this day for good.
It's going around. I cannot remember what I was going to say.
Well, I'll pick up, and then if you think of it, when you were talking about that, how do we decide? How do we decide with our free will? How do we learn to make our choices? Let's say we have somebody that isn't familiar with the Bible. I grew up going to church, but now we're in the Bible, the scriptures. I was aware of them, and I knew of verses and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not like I didn't know anything about the Bible, but to the extent it can be very intimidating and everything. But, there's a lot of resources and materials out there that either lead us towards the highway or the low way, towards wisdom or the lies. And we have been given the free will to decide and to decipher that. And Michael knows that when we were watching him and Charlie yesterday, or last night, he said, and I agree, God starts as a whisper. Our intuition, our spirit, the living spirit in us, God, and it always starts as a quiet whisper, like, psst, you should really pay attention to this. Psst, you might want to think about that again. And then it just gets louder, and it gets louder, and it gets, like he said, it's just God's shouting at us. But we still have free will, and we get to choose. Mm-hmm. And that's why we should not do life alone. We promote with our Funago, Families United, Never Alone, Gather Offline. No one of us or no family is meant to do life alone. We have to work together and hold each other accountable. And not accountable to human wisdom, or it's really not wisdom to me, the human lies, or to God's truth, God's wisdom, God's laws.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think basically it goes back to that. The kind of what I started with is the because they were talking about if you just you're a good person, you try, like regardless of your belief in God, you have morality, you have good versus evil, you have a knowing. In our minds, we have a knowing of this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. And good is God, and then bad is evil, the opposite. And so we are born with that knowing, that understanding, and it's something that's not necessarily easy to explain because it can't necessarily be explained. But again, you know when something is good versus bad, and it could be a very small decision, or it could be something as horrible as what happened yesterday. You know what I mean? So like, it's not that everything good and bad is like this really big thing that's going to affect a ton of people, but it'll affect you. And that should be enough. You know what I mean? Your life matters. That should be enough to make you want to change. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's necessarily words to fully explain it, but like Charlie was saying, he's like, it's not the same thing to say there is no God versus asking God, why did this happen? Why did you let this happen? You can be upset with him, you can be angry. He's like, that's not the same as saying there is no God, because he was using the example of an Old Testament. You've seen people you've seen people wrestling with God the entire time. I mean, it was just a continuous cycle of people questioning and wondering and crying out to God. So that is not the same thing as saying he doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Well, God knows the end from the beginning. He does do that, but he also allows us to have that freedom, that free will to choose. And I think about Job. If you read in Job how he was stripped of everything, and God did allow these things to happen, but it was also to test Job's, in my opinion, to test his faith, to test whether he was still going to follow God. And I believe God knew that like Job was a faithful servant, and I think that's why he allowed those things to happen, to prove to Satan, that he is one of mine, like he is one of God's. And so and I think just remembering that maybe when we do face our own choices, our choices today affect not just our lives but our eternity too. And so I don't know, I can't find the word for it, but to know that, and whenever we do make our choices, it's going to impact tomorrow and eternity.
Mm-hmm. And tomorrow depends on what we do today. Yeah. Eternity depends on what we do today. And it compounds, and it either grows in a godly way or it's the opposite. And we make mistakes, we make choices, we make errors. But we need to understand it didn't start with one person that, yesterday. Us humans can change. We have the ability. It's just how many people we have a mental health crisis, and how many people feel so alone, disconnected, separated, divided. They don't even know where to turn. And that didn't happen overnight. That even has compounded. And so we've got to get the truth out there and stop with the lies. And that's just one person at a time. We've got to do this. And we have to do our work. We have to do our part, And you both have said that. So, we definitely pray, keep in our prayers. And we have to do right here, right now, what we can do to help those that are hurting. Praying is one thing. And then making wise choices in our lives can help all those people that are hurting right now. Mm-hmm. And by us making wise choices, we are then helping others. We may not see that direct effect, but it's happening. It's happening. So anything else, any takeaway you have today?
Well, I mean,
is free will a responsibility?
Yeah, yeah. The reason I even came up with that title is because responsibility is apparently an antonym of free will. So we wanted to ask the question because I believe it is a responsibility because you can use free will for good or for bad, and that is your responsibility. That is um yours to decide. You know what I mean? No one can actually make that decision for you. Like Caitlin said, even God will not force you to do anything because he gives you the free will. So in my opinion, it is a responsibility. I think when people use it in a evil or bad way, they're shirking their responsibilities to be a godly person, to be someone who others can learn from and respect and all of that. So in that sense, I can see why it would be an antonym of free will, but I do think that free will is our responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, like it being our responsibility, we're going to answer for that one day, and we're going to answer for all of our choices that we do make. And so, like I said before, I think just remembering your choices that you make today are going to impact everyone else. It's going to impact yourself, your family. It's going to impact your tomorrow and your eternity.
And I would just add, are we going to choose medium or are we going to choose wisdom? And, you know, you've summed it up really well. And I think that we all can see where our choices get us. If we really stop and pay attention, we can see like you said, the blessings or the curses from our choices, Caitlin. And we have to slow down enough. We have to live slow enough. And we've got to, we mentioned in our mental attire, we have a video in there and a reflection sheet of quiet time and getting right with God and, you know, our conscience. As Cleopatra mentioned earlier, right from wrong. You know, it's pretty much right now, it seems like everything's right to some people and everything's wrong. And we all have our own right and wrong. But we need to go to God's wisdom and truth and get the right and wrong, not our own humans. So we appreciate you being here. We are thankful for you. No one shall do life alone. No family shall do life alone. Please do reach out and connect. We would love to interact, and we'd also love to help if you want any educational resources or materials or guidance of where to go. And if you've never opened a Bible or the scriptures or you're not familiar, don't be intimidated. Contact us. We'll help that happen, and take care, and we'll see you next time.